Hello and welcome back. Sorry that the first video cut off kind of unceremoniously, but we are back. We're still at Cerveteri, so that Etruscan necropolis, and we've just come from the Tomb of the Reliefs. That's going to be the last tomb that we look at there, but we are going to look at one more artifact before we move on. And that is this fibula. So a fibula is a clothespin, and it was used in Italy at this time a lot, and even moving forward. And the way that clothes worked back then, they were kind of just a big sheet of cloth, and then you would tie it around yourself and you would fasten it with a pin. And so this is the type of pin that you would use to fasten your clothing with one key difference, which is that this is about a foot tall. And normally when you're fastening clothing, the pins that you're going to use are maybe an inch or two, and this one is over a foot. So this is clearly a grave good. It is not to be used in the practical sense. It is a way for the artist to demonstrate their skill and to be used as part of this funerary context. And the artist definitely does display their skill here. So we'll talk a little bit about the sort of metalworking behind it. So the Etruscans were really skilled metal workers. That was a big part of their culture. And I put a few definitions on the board that all this fibula all contains. So the first one is reposse, which is metal punched from the back to create a relief image. And so where you see a relief, and I'm not sure if we talked about this earlier when I mentioned the Tomb of the Reliefs, but if you don't know, a relief is a sort of carving against a wall that is raised. So you're carving it out of the wall. You can have things in high relief, which means they're really carved high in space. There's a lot of depth between the top of it and the wall, or it can be in low relief, which means it's almost flat. It's barely even carved or a raised image at all. It's just like right against the wall. So you can have, that's low relief, and then you can have high relief. So right here we have relief images with those lions and done in the repoussé technique, which means that you're punching it from the back so that an image is created on the front. And there are those lions that you see. The lions are actually not a symbol of Etruria necessarily. So you'll notice the date here. The date is about 650 to 640 BCE. So that's prior to the Archaic period, prior to the sarcophagus of the spouses that we saw earlier. And what's happening here is that the Etruscans are not being influenced so much by Greece, because Greece at this time hadn't really developed those sort of artistic styles. They're being influenced more by the Near East. So places like Mesopotamia, the Achaemenids, that regime, sort of over in Iran. And the lion was a much bigger symbol there. And you can see that. So I've put sort of for comparison, this frieze from Persepolis in your modern day Iran. From a little bit later, but still the same sort of style. You can see the similarities between the lions on the fibula and the lion in the frieze. And so the Etruscans are being influenced at this time by the Near East. And then later on, we'll start seeing more of that Greek influence come into play. This is both because there was sort of a difference in trading patterns, but also as centers of power shift, they sort of become the most popular, the most influential. And so at this time, around the 7th century BC, those regimes in the Near East were quite powerful. And so their iconography and their styles kind of get transported across the Mediterranean. In the Archaic period, that's when we start to see the rise of Greece, especially in the classical period, which comes right after that in the mid-5th century. And so at that time, then we start to see the Italian peninsula copying Greece more. So at this time, a little bit earlier, we're taking inspiration from the Near East. A couple other terms, granulation. So those are on the bottom, and that sort of pendant shape. Those are the drops of metal that create these bead-like raised dots. And then filigree, that's that sort of swirling pattern around the edges. And it sort of resembles lace almost. And so these are all very skilled metalworking techniques. And so this is really a display of great Etruscan design and artistry. And again, it's copying something that would have been a practical everyday object, but here it's done on such a larger scale that it's purely sort of ceremonial or for a funerary context. So this is the last one that we're looking at from Cerveteri, but we are going to move to a different necropolis, a different Etruscan necropolis. And that is Monterazzi in Tarquinia, Italy. So let's see on the map here. So we were just in Cerveteri, which is here, again, Rome, not too far away. And Tarquinia is to the north even further. So also, I should mention that Cerveteri and Tarquinia are the names of the Etruscan towns, and then the necropoli have their own names. So in this case, Monterazzi is the name of the necropolis, and Tarquinia is sort of the larger settlement or city-state that it was a part of. The tomb that we're going to look at here is, I should mention, yeah, so for the necropolis in Tarquinia, something that you'll notice a lot is these really brightly painted walls. And so the wall paintings really survived well from this period. And they are, in this one in particular, the Tomb of the Augers, the ceiling would have been painted as well, but it's didn't last. It hasn't been preserved, possibly because moisture soaks in from the top, since this is a subterranean chamber. Not sure, just a possibility. But we've talked about augurs in this lecture already, right? So an augur, if you'll remember, is the figure who depicts or who interprets the signs of the birds, which are signs that are coming from the gods, right? So these auspices is a sign made by birds in the sky that is supposedly doing the god's will. It's supposed to tell you what the gods are thinking, what they are sort of divining, what they see. And an augur is the one who is interpreting those birds and telling you, this is what the gods are saying because I saw these birds in this way. So they're sort of the go-betweens. And so the Tomb of the Augurs, so let's see, what do we have here on this painting? So in the very back, we have two men who are facing that door. They both have like one hand out and one hand over their face. And anytime that you see a figure in antiquity with their hand over their face, it usually means that they're in mourning. So touching your face is a sign that you're in mourning. This makes a lot of sense because we are in a funerary context. So we are in a tomb, and so it makes sense that there would be figures in mourning. And then on that long wall, we have a scene. So the central image is two men wrestling, and I've blown that up in the bottom corner there, a more frontal view. And so these men are wrestling as part of funerary games. So when someone died, especially someone important, games might be held in their honor, and wrestling is one of the things that might take place at these games. You'll notice that the men are in the nude. That was how wrestling and sports, any kind of athletic competition was done. It's a very Greek thing, think of the Olympics, right? So maybe they took that from there. So the two men are wrestling, and then you'll see next to them these other men and birds above them. And the men are the augurs, and they are interpreting the signs of the birds, right? So they're looking up to the sky, trying to understand what the gods are thinking through these birds, probably in relation to the athletic competition that's taking place, right? So they are probably trying to see who's going to win based on what the birds in the sky are doing, just like the competition between Romulus and Remus. So a very common sort of religious ritual at this time. A couple other things to note here, is really just the Greek influence, not just in the subject matter, but also the style. So the musculature of the men is something that we'll really see as being idealized, right? That's an idealized body type, this very, muscular, sort of unreal body type. And that's very Greek, and we'll see that more. So we see Greek influence here, as well as just the style of painting in general is also quite Greek, and we will see that next lecture. I'm actually saving one tomb from Tarquinia and not talking about it in this lecture because I want to show you how similar it is to the Greek paintings that we will see next time. So look out for that. There we go. Yep, so a couple other tombs, pretty much all the tombs, like I said, from Tarquinia are quite brightly painted. This is the Tomb of the Leopards. And you can see those two leopards right here facing each other with their tongues out, I guess. And you'll notice that the top of the ceiling is very geometric, right? So prior to the Archaic period was the geometric period, when we see a lot of geometric shapes being popular. If you think of maybe a typical Greek vase, sometimes you'll see the borders, right, are kind of in these square designs. So we have some of those remnants left over in this period. But what's really interesting about this one is that it is depicting a symposium. So a Greek symposium is essentially a banquet. It's kind of a social gathering. It would be men only, right? And it would take place in a triclinium. So just to remind you, triclinium, right? So tri meaning three, clinia meaning couches. So 3 couches. And that is that's the term that we use for a dining room, right? A dining room in the ancient world. And so what we have here is a triclinium with a symposium, a banquet taking place. And you'll notice that there are 3 couches, right? If you look in the back, 1, 2, 3, we have 3 couches here, and we have men who are reclining on them. And then next to them, we have women who are also on the couches with them. And women were not allowed at symposia, except to be sort of entertainment, right? So they were flute players, things like that. And so these women are there for sort of entertainment. I think one of them might even be holding a flute, although it's hard to see. But yeah, they're the ones with the lighter skin, the really pale white skin. That's going to be the women who are there to entertain. And then we have the 2 standing figures who are slaves who are serving the men at this banquet. So it's a sort of party scene, music and revelry. Oh, that's right. Someone on the side is playing a flute there. Definitely a party scene, right? And so interesting in a funerary context, because you might think of funerary context as being mournful or sorrowful, but here we have a party. So it's maybe supposed to represent this person is they're doing well in the afterlife. It could also be a sign of sort of reverence for the person that a banquet was maybe held in their honor when they died. You know, we saw the funerary games on the last slide that was held in honor of someone. So maybe in this case, a banquet was held for the deceased. Anything else I want to say about this? Yeah, just more common motifs from the Greek world. And so we see a lot of that influence here. And then one more, again, the tomb of the triclinium. So this one is actually called that, so don't get them mixed up, because there's multiple that feature triclinia, but this is actually called the tomb of the triclinium. Don't know why it got that title and not the others. It's also from Tarquinia around the same time period. And something that I want to mention, this one's quite similar to the last one we looked at. There's even some also some bird imagery over here we see. The people are on couches there, sort of reclined. Yeah, something that I wanted to mention also is that if you think about the sarcophagi, right, so the sarcophagus that we looked at, the reclining motions are kind of the same. It's the same positioning, and like I said, that's a really common iconography in sarcophagi, but then we also see it here on the walls of these kind of reclining figures on couches. And then you'll see that here too. In the back, it's kind of not preserved super well, but you'll see people reclining, and then we have, again, a geometric ceiling. And something that I want to note, though, is that the difference between these and the Tomb of the Reliefs, right? In the Tomb of the Reliefs, we have all those objects on the walls, and there's no depictions of people. And then here we have a lot of people on the walls. So you can see that in the Tomb of the Reliefs, it's almost that the people inside are those in the banquet, right? So the dead are the ones who are taking part in that banquet, and we had that symbol of the underworld. So it's maybe supposed to say that the people at the banquet, the guests, are the dead, are the people in the tomb. Whereas here we have the people on the walls, and so it's again more of that sort of a party being held in their honor, right? These people are celebrating the dead, whereas the other case, it was more the dead were the ones at the celebration. So a little bit of a difference there. Okay, cool. So we are going to move on. That was our last tomb. We're going to move on now to architecture, so standing architecture, and the last sort of influence that the Etruscans might have had on the Romans, or at least that we're going to study, and that is temple design. So it's worth noting that Etruscan religion and Roman religion, and for that matter, Greek religion, were all very similar. So they basically had the same structure. They were pagan, polytheistic, multiple gods. And they also, the gods who they worshipped were the same. They had different names a lot of times. So you might hear Athena in Greece, and then Minerva in the Italian peninsula. Also Zeus in Greece, Jupiter in Rome, right? So they had different names, but they're basically the same attributes and the same sort of people or gods. And that extends to temple design and the way that they were worshipped as well, and the type of rituals. So this is the Etruscan temple. Etruscans, like you saw in their homes, did not necessarily build out of very durable, long-lasting materials, but they were more sort of organic, right? So they used wood, mud, things like that, ceramic, and these do not last very long. So we don't have a lot of standing Etruscan architecture really at all, except for those tumuli, which were made also of stone. And we just have, that's why we have those urns that we have to learn about the houses from, right? Because we don't have any standing architecture. But we do know what some of their temples looked like, although they do not exist anymore. And so this is it. So let's see some of the features here, right? So if you start at the front, we have a staircase right in the front center. So it raises it above street level. We have a porch here, which is called the pronaos, Pronaos. And that basically means it's the thing before the naos. And that is also called the cella. The naos is called the cella in sort of, it's just Latin versus Greek. So we're going to use the term cella. And so the cella is the main part. If you think of a Christian church, it would be the kind of the central area, right, where everyone sits, where everything happens. So it's the biggest sort of body of the building. But we have the porch before that, which is still outside, and then the cella on the inside. They typically had tripartite cellas. So that means that the cella was divided into 3 sort of areas. And this was because they worshipped often triad gods. So the Capitoline Triad is Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva. So that would be Zeus, Hera, and Athena if you're talking about the Greek gods. And this was a kind of a big trio. It was like their big 3 who they also often worshipped, but Jupiter was definitely the top. He was sort of he's kind of the king of the gods, so he was the most important. A couple other things about Etruscan design though. You'll notice that big roof, they have that big sloping roof, which turns into, or in Greek, it kind of resembles a pediment, right? So that triangular pediment that you see at the top of temples. Here, it's a really big overhanging roof. And again, that goes back to the fact that they were building in mud brick or wood. And so you don't want this building to get wet, because if mud brick gets wet, it's just going to become even more muddy. So Greek temples didn't have that problem, but Etruscan temples did. And so they had this big overhanging roof so that the water, the rain could go off the sides. Other big thing you might notice, the Acroteria. So the Acroteria are those figures that are standing on the top of the roof. And there's sort of that one big one in the center. And these would have crowned the temple. These are very Etruscan. You'll see them in other cultures, but this is a very Etruscan style. So that's what you should know. That was not borrowed. If anything, it was taken from the Etruscans. It's a very Etruscan motif. Also notice that the temple is just very frontally oriented. So similar to their houses where the door was on that short end and you enter and then there's the long axis. Similar thing here where you don't enter from any other sides. It's all from the front and then going into the back. So here's an example of the Acroteria, like I said. So again, those are the figures on the top. So Acroteria, acro, like Acropolis, right? So acro meaning highest or extremes, talking about the topmost area. So it's an Acroteria. Acroterion is the singular, Acroteria is the plural. So Acroteria are sculpted architectural ornaments placed on the top of a building. Very popular, as I said, in Etruscan culture. This is one that I want to look at in particular. So this is one of Apollo. You can see that there's a little bit different spelling that the Etruscans used. They called him Apullu. This is from the Porto Nacio Sanctuary in Veii. And you can see that on the map here, very close to Rome, really at the southern tip of the Etruscan territory. 510 BC, and this would have stood on the top of a temple. So it is made out of terracotta, like we saw with the sarcophagus, right? Really common building material or sculpting material for the Etruscans. Pretty tall, 5'9". It needs to be seen on the top of a building, so kind of maybe makes sense. And I hope you already noticed, but this is definitely in the archaic style. So you see, again, those almond-shaped eyes. Look at the hair. The hair is really like in those kind of coils. The archaic smile, a huge indication. But there are a couple things here that are not so Greek. One of the biggest things is the fact that he is clothed. Greeks did not like clothing their statues unless it was a woman. But male statues were almost never clothed in Greek culture. And so this is definitely a difference that we have made by the Etruscans. Something else is that, yeah, it's made out of terracotta. Again, Greek sculptures would have been made out of marble. And so we definitely see a difference in terms of that here. And you'll also notice that that shows up like it did on the sarcophagus. It shows up in the movement of the body, right? So he has sort of a different stance. His arms are no longer with us, but his arms would have been some sort of movement kind of gesture. So again, we see more movement due to the terracotta material. All right, let's move on. So again, I was talking about the comparison between Etruscan and Greek temples. So here is a great side-by-side. So and a good plan as well. So you can see here, right, those are the stairs that are leading in. We have the pronaos and then the tripartite cella. And then we have this big overhanging roof, all very Etruscan. And look at that, around the sides, we don't have very many columns, just as far as the porch goes, and then nothing else around. But Greek temple is very different. So it has columns all the way around. And it also does have a frontal entrance, but it has this, the entire sides of it have stairs leading up. So the stairs would have gone around this whole side, the columns would have gone along the whole sides. Also, the inside is different, so we don't see any kind of tripartite cella. We have, and this is the Parthenon, so it's a little bit different actually, but it has a naos, right? And then this back part is not really common in all temples, but specific to the Acropolis or to the Parthenon. Yeah, so there's some similarities though, right? So the idea of sort of a triangular shape, the idea of columns, the idea of it being raised above street level with some sort of interior chamber, we have similarities here. That's, we see actually Acroteria on this temple, which again would have been taken from the Etruscans. And so we do see similarities, but there are definitely differences. So that's Etruscan and Greek. And the Romans, now let's look at them. So here is what a Roman temple would look like. And I'm comparing it with the plans, right? So a plan is a top-down view, just so we're all on the same page, right? So that's like you cut off the top, like you cut off the roof and you're peering into it. That's what it would look like. So Roman is a bit of a mix of the two, but here at this point, it's going to lean very much more heavily toward Etruscan. And that's really important to get, that early Roman temples much more resembled Etruscan temples than Greek. And we see that, right? There's that deep pronaos. There is a tripartite cella. There is a very sort of frontally situated entrance, right? So there's an emphasis on the front with those stairs leading up only there. So it's going to look very Etruscan. And this is the big temple that we have from Rome in this time, probably the first temple that was ever built in the city, and perhaps the most important. So this is the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, built in Rome, built on the Capitoline Hill. So if you've ever been to Rome, or you can remember that from that picture, right, the 7 hills of Rome, the Capitoline is sort of just across from the Palatine Hill. It's not too far. If you're in Rome today, you just go over the Forum. It's on the other side of where the Forum is. And the Capitoline Hill now has a museum, the Capitoline Museum. And so this is all that remains of our temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus. It's just the foundations of it. This is called ashlar masonry. So this means that they cut the stone to fit together perfectly, right? So the way that it's stacked like that is ashlar masonry. But that's all that's left, just the foundation. But in the Roman times, it may have looked something like this. And you can see that it resembles that Etruscan style more than the Greek at this time in the 6th century, right? So we have that big overhanging roof. There's not much Acroteria in this picture, but there definitely would have been. That was my one qualm. I was like, do I use this photo? Because it doesn't show very many Acroteria, and it would have had a lot of Acroteria. So definitely an Etruscan style. We do see that there's the columns that go all the way around, but it's still frontally focused. So the stairs are only at the front. And then again, that tripartite cella, very Etruscan. There you go. There are the terms for you. Sorry, I didn't have them before. A couple other things, yeah, so this is the Capitoline Triad. Now you know why we call it Capitoline Triad, because it was on the Capitoline Hill. Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva. Jupiter would have been he's the greatest and best, and that's what Jupiter Optimus Maximus means, Jupiter, greatest and best. And so he's sort of the king, as I said. What else do I want to say about this? Let's see. Yeah, so the last thing is that, yeah, so it's made of local stone, also important. So in Greece, we talk a lot about how, if you've taken Greek art classes, the Acropolis is made from marble, right? Marble that was quarried from nearby. Same thing in Rome. So tufa is the name of the rock. That was the rock on the Palatine Hill that the huts were built out of, their foundations. And a lot of things in Rome are built, at least from this time, from tufa, because that is the local stone. And that's Tufa. All right, so this is kind of rounding us out. We're coming to the end here. So I just kind of wanted to bring together everything we've been talking about, right? And show you this plan again. So again, here we are, Palatine Hill. That's where Romulus founded Rome, right? Remus was killed. And so Romulus becomes king, chooses the Palatine Hill to build the settlement in 753. At this time, we have the cemetery, the necropolis, right in the middle, so where the Roman Forum would later be. And then over here, we have the Capitoline Hill with Jupiter, greatest and best, his temple, crowning that. And that's kind of it for early Rome. Early Rome was, not too big. It was pretty small. And so it really is amazing to see how much it's going to grow over the centuries. Oh yes, here we go. So this is another depiction of the Capitoline Triad temple. And you can see more Acroteria on this. So something that we'll do in this class is a lot of times look at coins. Coins have great architectural evidence on them because similar to our coins, they would decorate them with certain national symbols. And so here we have the Capitoline Triad temple here. And you can see the columns and definitely Acroteria on the top. And then again, just to remind you again what their houses would have looked like. So this is where we're at. This is where we're at around the 6th to 8th centuries BC in Rome. We also do see the beginnings of the Roman Forum. So you see that on the screen by the necropolis. We know that in 525 or around that time BC, the Roman Forum was drained and it was paved because it was flooding a lot and they were just starting to build the Forum there, which is sort of the downtown like marketplace area. And they were just starting to build the Forum and it kept flooding. And so what they did was they used an Etruscan technology to drain it, pave it, and enable it to not flood anymore so that it could be used as, like I said, this sort of marketplace downtown government area. A little bit more of the history for you. So here we are, like I said, maybe 8th to 6th centuries. Rome becomes a republic in 509. So that is the last time that there is a king in Rome. I might not go into the whole story here, but the general gist of it is that the last king had a son, and his son committed a very bad crime. He raped a woman, and she was already married also, and it was a terrible crime. And she was so distraught over this that she actually ends up committing suicide. And so this is a devastating event that happens, and the people of Rome are so outraged. One of them in particular is named Brutus, which you may have heard that name from Roman history. A different Brutus, not the one who knew Caesar, although that one does try to claim this Brutus as an ancestor, which is kind of interesting. But anyway, this Brutus, Lucretia is the name of the victim and who commits suicide. She kills herself with a dagger, and Brutus is so distraught, as are all of these other people in Rome, right, that he pulls the dagger out of her and he raises it above his arm and declares that there will no more, never again, be a king of Rome. And this is a galvanizing hallmark moment for Rome, right, because there has been a great scandal and they have decided that never again will they have kings. And this becomes such a part of the national mythology and mindset, right? It's almost like, in the US, if you think back to the American Revolution and how much those people hated King George, right? We sort of still have that same mindset today that we hate kings, right? Like we can't imagine America having a king again. And so this idea was ingrained in the Roman mentality. And that's why when later on, as I keep referencing, this event that we're going to get to at the fall of the Republic, that's why it's really such a big deal. It's not just because we're moving from a republic to an emperor. It's like, no, we hate the idea of a single ruler. So very important. And that event, as I said, kicks off the Republic. Another notable event happens in 390 BC, and that's why we also don't have much material evidence from this area, is because in 390 BC, Rome is sacked by Gallic troops, Gallic tribes from what is modern day France, sort of that area. And this is a big moment for Rome also. This is another event that sort of goes into their national ethos, because the Gauls pretty much destroy the city. They come in and they destroy everything. They desecrate the city. And it awakens the Romans to the fact that they need to shore up their defenses, right? Because they can't have that happen again. And it makes them embark on a huge building campaign to create a city wall and all of these sort of defenses. And it really also awakens in them sort of a, I don't know about a sense of vengeance, but they are galvanized to fight back. And so that also is sort of the beginnings of what we start to see of Roman expansion, and also this very militaristic spirit that the Romans had. Right, they're a very like military culture. Their army and their defenses were very important to them, and it starts to be that all starts and stems from this attack by the Gauls, right? And so those two events, the rape of Lucretia, we call it, and then the sack of the city, are two major events in Roman mindsets that will really determine the next 500 years and beyond. So we're going to look more at the Roman Republic next class. That's kind of our topic. And then we're also going to continue our discussion of Greek influence and look at some Greek colonies in Italy. And then lastly, we're also going to look at, so we looked at the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus today, which greatly resembles an Etruscan temple. You know, there you see a bit more influence from the Etruscans on that one. But next time we're going to look at a temple which really combines Etruscan and Greek influence, but also has some elements that are new, some new Roman elements that point to the Romans developing their own unique style. So very excited for that. Stay tuned and we'll see you next week.